I didn't expect a parade, but I did expect a door that opened. On my last day at the company, the badge I'd used for 30 years didn't work. I stood outside the glass doors, waiting for a temp from security to buzz me in like I was there to fix the vending machine. No cake, no card, not even one of those awkward cupcakes from HR with "good luck" spelled out in smeared frosting. Just a system lockout and a generic email. "Thank you for your contributions." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was crying in the parking lot like a retiree in a Hallmark movie. And I'm not that kind of woman. That office had been my second home since my 20s. I built departments from scratch, salvaged acquisitions on the brink of collapse, and held compliance reviews together with duct tape and 3 a.m. spreadsheets. I trained managers who now ran divisions. I knew every system by heart because I helped design half of them. When I stepped out that door for the last time, I didn't even get a pen with the company logo. 3 days later, my name was wiped from the org chart like whiteboard marker. My team was scattered across departments like loose screws in a junk drawer. Some were moved into product, others shoved under the umbrella of strategic operations, whatever that meant. The man pulling the strings? Darren Holt, VP of Strategic Ops, fresh off a transformational leadership stint at a startup that imploded 6 months later. The board loved him. Fancy socks, quoted self-help books in meetings, real visionary type. Also, not a clue how anything actually worked. I heard through the grapevine, specifically from Maya, my old analyst, that Darren told the division in a Monday town hall, "Christine was great, but let's be honest, anyone can do what she did." Anyone can do what I did? I once spent 7 weekends manually reconciling vendor contracts because the system broke and we were 2 days from being non-compliant in 3 states. I de-escalated billion-dollar clients over coffee and printer paper. I trained people like Darren, fast talkers who thought being loud was the same as being competent. But sure, anyone could do what I did. I tried to walk away with grace. I really did. But that comment stuck like a splinter under my skin. Every time I tried to relax on a beach in Sarasota, I'd remember his smug face and those words echoing like an insult I never got to answer. It wasn't about ego. It was about erasure. 30 years of grinding, bleeding for that place, and I was written off as obsolete by a man who hadn't even figured out where the shared drive was. Then came the first message. From Maya. Short. Cryptic. "They're using your system for the merger." It's not going well. I had just finished planting tomatoes in my backyard. Dirt under my nails. Sun in my eyes. Half a plan to open a second bottle of rosé by noon. Then my phone buzzed again. "They can't get the deal through. They're using your old system badly." I stared at the screen like it might clarify itself if I blinked hard enough. Maya wasn't dramatic. She was methodical. If she was texting riddles instead of emailing, something was deeply off. I called. No answer. Texted back. Nothing. I poured the wine anyway, sat on the porch, tried not to let it get under my skin. "Not your circus, not your monkeys," I muttered. But my gut said otherwise. That system, my system, was a Frankenstein of custom compliance scripts, contract indexing, and auto alerts I'd pieced together over 12 years. It wasn't pretty, but it was airtight. And it was never meant to be touched by anyone who didn't know what they were doing. Then came another ping. Simon, one of our old biotech clients. "Christine, hope you're well. Quick one. Do you know who to escalate to on the Viron tech side? We're hitting delays and getting conflicting updates. Can't seem to get a clean audit trail on the Q3 data." Audit trail. Conflicting updates. My system was built to eliminate those exact issues, unless someone had tampered with it or replaced key modules with something faster and cheaper, which usually meant grey. Over the next few days, the pattern spread like oil in a puddle. Another former client reached out asking if I was consulting for Viren Tech again. Apparently, my name had come up in a vendor call. Not directly, just mentioned. Christine oversaw this process. Christine's methodology is still being followed. Present tense, like I was still on payroll, like my signature still meant something. That was the first real chill. If my name was being thrown around to cover gaps, then either they hadn't updated the records when I left, which was idiotic and dangerous, or someone was deliberately pretending I was still behind the curtain. Then came the kicker. A voicemail. Anonymous number. Voice altered like a bad spy movie. Her name's on the pre-clearance documents. If the merger goes through, it's on you too. Click. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up in my kitchen with an old legal pad and a yellowing folder of printouts I probably should have shredded when I retired. The more I mapped it out, the more obvious it became. They were leveraging my legacy tools without understanding how they worked, citing my processes without actually using them, propping up filings with my name as a ghost credential. I could have called a lawyer, could have tipped off someone in the press. But a part of me, maybe the part that never really left the war room, knew the best way to stop a fire was to walk straight into the smoke. And if Darren thought I'd stay retired while he used my name as his shield, he'd forgotten exactly who trained him. I met Alan Pierce at a sad little steakhouse off the interstate. Grey suit, polite smile, the kind that only comes before asking for a favor. He sighed. "It's Darren," he said. The merger was in trouble. $480 million on the table. A biotech conglomerate wanted to absorb Viren Tech's systems, roll our compliance engine into theirs, standardize reporting protocols. Regulators had flagged the risk assessment database. The original one, mine. Darren had called it outdated, legacy, sold the board on a modernization plan, replaced my validation layers with automated wrappers. Problem was, they were producing false passes. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I had warned them 2 years ago. Alan tapped a folder. "We need someone to review the current audit trail, quietly, no hiring, no announcements." I stared at him. 30 years in that company, and now I was being asked to moonlight as a ghost fixer. No title, no ceremony, just informal consulting. I agreed. On one condition: full access, system logs, internal change logs, rollback timestamps, everything from the day I left to now. He hesitated, then nodded. "Grayson doesn't have to know." Good, because if he did, I wouldn't be doing it. I got home, poured a fresh glass of wine, booted up the machine I swore I'd never turn on again, logged in. The system hadn't changed much. Same bones, same layout. But something felt off, like a familiar house with new locks. I pulled the master log index. Within an hour, I spotted the first crack. A batch of entries marked, "Reviewed by C. Morris." 2 months after my retirement. That wasn't a clerical error. That was fraud. The form in question: a 47-page internal review checklist used to validate audit prep ahead of any deal involving asset consolidation. Exactly the kind of document regulators inspect under a microscope. My digital signature was attached, time-stamped, verified. Problem was, I hadn't been in the building that week. I'd been in the Keys with my niece, drinking rum and helping her break up with her awful boyfriend. I dug deeper. The file metadata said the document had been opened using my admin credentials, ones that should have been deactivated upon retirement. The access logs showed a new workstation ID routed through a proxy to hide the source IP. Sloppy. Then I found the second anomaly. An outbound document labeled Regulatory Disclosures, Rev 4.3, had a submission date that didn't align with its approval date. It had been opened, edited, and closed in under 5 minutes. Impossible for anyone reviewing that level of detail, unless they'd already planned to falsify it. One clause, Clause 12F, was missing entirely. I'd written that clause myself after we got burned by a supplier in Belgium 5 years ago. There was no way I would have missed it. I printed everything, highlighted every gap, every suspicious timestamp. My little Frankenstein system might have been clunky, but it never lied. Not unless someone made it lie. And that someone was Darren. He hadn't just erased my work. He'd taken my reputation, my name, used it like a borrowed shield, slapped it on half-formed documents, sent them upstream, crossed his fingers no one would look too close. Because Christine Morris was the gold standard. And who questions the gold standard? I spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing every form filed under my name, built a timeline, labelled discrepancies. I wasn't here to scream. I was here to build a noose. And when the time came, I was going to make damn sure he hung by his own signature. The conference room was quiet, almost forgotten. Dust settled on the credenza, and a coffee cup near the window had turned into its own ecosystem. It was the kind of space reserved for conversations no one wanted overheard. That's where the external compliance liaison reviewed the folder I had prepared. Printed documents, not digital. Metadata trails, approval timestamps, and procedural gaps. Enough to raise flags, but not yet enough to trigger alarms. Back at my temporary workstation, the whispers had already begun. HR assistants glanced over their monitors. A former colleague passed me in the hallway with a look that hovered between relief and worry. Darren walked past twice without acknowledging me, but the tension clung to him like static. Slack traffic on his team's channel surged. IT logs showed sudden permission audits. Someone was preparing a narrative. I turned my attention to expense reports. Vendor payments tied to compliance consulting and regulatory prep revealed 3 transactions, each just below the reporting threshold. All were routed to a consultancy that didn't exist in any official database. No website, no procurement records. A domain lookup traced the email to a shell address linked to Darren's cousin, the same cousin listed as an independent auditor in an internal white paper. The pattern was clear. Funds were being siphoned quietly, masked by fake firms and buried in paperwork. The fraud wasn't just procedural, it was financial. And the foundation of it all was my name, used as a borrowed credential to validate documents that should never have passed review. I printed everything. No digital footprints, no searchable files, just paper. The kind that speaks louder in a boardroom than any email ever could. The next morning, I uploaded a single file to the internal documentation platform, a legacy compliance form, version 2.7. I placed it in a shared folder marked Archive Review, Pending, and added one comment, a simple question about verification. It wasn't an accusation, it was a breadcrumb. Within an hour, the comment triggered a response. A junior analyst flagged the file to legal. The legal team escalated it. A review ticket was opened. Meetings were rescheduled. Slack channels lit up. Darren called an emergency sync titled Final Compliance Review. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Later that afternoon, a formal request arrived from the external liaison. A follow-up meeting was scheduled to address inconsistencies in document metadata and approval records. My name was listed as a required attendee. That evening, the internal chat logs were ablaze. Legal had discovered a version mismatch in the pre-acquisition checklist. 2 lines approved under my name didn't exist in the archived policy library. The file had been routed through a shadow directory labelled Fast Track Approvals, Legacy Hold. It wasn't a real department. It was a fabricated routing tag designed to simulate compliance. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. The jaws hadn't snapped shut yet, but the tension in the building was unmistakable. The leadership sync took place in a glass-walled conference room. Darren stood at the head of the table, presenting a slide deck filled with green check marks and pie charts. He spoke of resolved gaps and restored integrity. I sat in the back corner, silent, Observing. Across the table, the external liaison reviewed the slides without expression. The senior legal advisor, seated beside him, scribbled notes in a black notebook. Then, without a word, she slid a folder across the floor with her foot until it reached my chair. Inside was the finalized merger term sheet. Section 14 contained a clause citing a policy ID, CM67A, supposedly approved by me. That policy had never been validated. It was a draft I had shelved years ago. It held no legal standing. Yet there it was, embedded in the official filing, bearing my name. I stood and walked to the head of the table. A sealed folder was placed in front of the external counsel. Inside was a timeline of falsified approvals, audit logs showing manipulation of my credentials, and a notarized affidavit confirming my non-involvement. A whistleblower report from Maya was included, along with metadata records tracing the forged clause back to Darren's workstation. The room fell silent. The CEO reviewed the documents. Security was summoned. Darren was escorted out. No protests, no drama. Just the soft click of the door behind him. The boardroom remained still. The CEO turned to me and requested a conversation. I placed a second folder on the table, a proposal for a third-party compliance firm. Fully staffed, already contracted with federal regulators. The logo on the cover read, Morris Integrity Partners, LLC. The board reviewed the terms. Heads nodded. The CEO closed the folder and requested the contract for review before lunch. I gathered my things. No dramatic exit, no lingering stares. Just the quiet rhythm of closure as I walked the corridor toward the elevators. Passing my old office, now a flex workspace filled with pastel decor and motivational quotes, I heard a whisper from someone I didn't recognize. A quiet acknowledgement of the systems I built, the audits I saved, and the legacy they tried to erase. But they couldn't. The building still bore my fingerprints. Every shortcut they took curved back into my blueprint. And when the fire started, it wasn't Darren they called. It was me. No speeches, no second cake. Just a returned name and a removed fraud. Retired, not silenced, and definitely not done.